Are you stocking up on emergency food thinking you've got it all covered? Well, think again. Today we're breaking down 7 popular Walmart foods that could totally derail your survival stash. These items look like smart buys at first glance, but when it really counts, they might leave you hungry, frustrated, or outright unprepared when disaster hits. You'd be surprised how easy it is to throw these into your cart without giving them a second thought. Here's the truth. They're taking up space, wasting your money, and might fail miserably when you need them the most. The worst part? Most people don't even realize these items are deceptive, and they're letting these so-called survival foods sit in their pantry, thinking they're all set for an emergency. Stick with us, because by the end of this, you'll not only know what not to buy, but you'll have a clearer plan for building a reliable stockpile. Trust me, it's time for a reality check, and your future self will thank you for being prepared the right way. Let's jump in. 1. In-store bakery donuts and pastries. Stop fooling yourself into thinking these sugary snacks deserve a spot in your emergency stash. Sure, they look tempting when they're sitting on Walmart's bakery shelves and beg to be tossed in your cart. You might even convince yourself, oh, I can freeze them, or we'll eat them before they go bad. But here's the harsh truth. They're garbage for long-term storage. These pastries are loaded with sugar and unhealthy fats, giving you a blood sugar spike but no real nutritional value. When disaster hits and food supplies are tight, you'll need sustenance that keeps you going, not something that leaves you crashing in 2 hours. Donuts and pastries won't offer vitamins, protein, or fiber. They're essentially empty calories taking up precious space in your pantry or freezer. Speaking of freezing, don't bank on it working well for these items. Even if you freeze them, they lose their texture and flavor when defrosted. Nobody wants to eat stale, soggy donuts in any scenario, and honestly, you shouldn't waste the freezer space when there are better food options. Plus, frozen goods are a risk in emergencies involving power outages. Imagine all those pastries defrosting into a gross mess while you're already dealing with a stressful situation. Don't forget that baked goods attract pests faster than you think. Without industrial-grade sealing, ants, rodents, and other unwelcome critters could invade your stash. You'll wind up throwing food and likely money straight into the trash. Want something sweet that actually lasts? Stockpile honey. It literally never goes bad and can even add some antibacterial perks. Canned or dried fruits can also satisfy a sweet tooth without rotting within a week. But those in-store bakery pastries? Leave them on the shelf. They're a short-term comfort food at best and a complete waste of space and resources for emergencies. Don't bother. 2. Bagged lettuce or spinach. Don't even think about tossing those giant bags of spinach or lettuce into your cart for prepping purposes. It's a ridiculous idea. These greens seem like a healthy choice, right? Wrong. They're one of the worst foods you can think of stockpiling for emergencies. And here's why. First, they rot fast. Those bags of leafy greens are crammed with water content, meaning they wilt, slime, and stink in just a few days, even under perfect refrigeration. If you lose power or refrigeration gets inconsistent due to an emergency, you might as well throw the whole bag in the trash on day 1. There's no salvaging rotten lettuce. Worse, the stench of decayed greens can taint other foods stored nearby. Some people believe freezing spinach is a smart hack, but to freeze it properly, you need to blanch it first, a time-consuming, energy-burning process. And again, all this relies on having power readily available. If your goal is to prepare for scenarios like power outages or long-term shortages, fresh greens are laughably bad options. Plus, after thawing, frozen spinach turns into a mushy pile that doesn't even resemble something you'd want to eat. Lettuce? Forget it. You can't even freeze that disaster waiting to happen. The nutritional argument also falls apart. While spinach and lettuce are packed with vitamins initially, those nutrients degrade fast as the greens start wilting. By the time they reach their slimy end, they're worthless. Canned greens, powdered kale, or freeze-dried veggies are far smarter alternatives. Not only do they retain their nutrients longer, but they're also shelf-stable in the long term. A simple alternative? Grow your own. An indoor or outdoor garden makes way more sense than stockpiling bags of greens that will spoil in no time. Bagged lettuce might work for your next salad, but for emergency preparedness, it's a joke. Don't waste your money or your valuable storage space. 3. Large quantities of fresh dairy. Fresh milk and perishable dairy are some of the dumbest things to stockpile when preparing for emergencies. Yes, milk, yogurt, and random cheese blocks are staples for your everyday diet, but in a crisis, they quickly become a liability. This shouldn't even be up for debate. Milk, for example, has an incredibly short shelf life. Even inside your fridge, milk goes bad within days of opening, unless it's ultra-pasteurized. If an emergency takes your power out for any stretch of time, you're stuck with a gallon of spoiled dairy stinking up the house. Freezing milk sounds like a genius solution, right? Wrong. Milk expands when frozen, often breaking its container, and when thawed, it separates into an unappealing texture that's barely drinkable. Now, cheese is a slightly better option, but only if you buy hard varieties like Parmesan or aged cheddar. Even then, it needs refrigeration to last. Soft cheeses or massive yogurt tubs? Forget it. These products turn into breeding grounds for bacteria the second the temperature rises. The last thing you need during a disaster is food poisoning because your dairy stash went bad, and don't even get me started on the mess factor. Leaking milk cartons or yogurt spills are a nightmare, especially if they spoil other items in your emergency stockpile. Cross-contamination could ruin an entire stash because you thought buying tubs of dairy was a good call. Here's the smarter choice for your dairy cravings. Grab powdered milk or shelf-stable cartons. Powdered milk can last for years and is easy to reconstitute when needed. It doesn't taste exactly the same, but in an emergency scenario, who's complaining? Shelf-stable milk is another reliable option. It doesn't need refrigeration until opened and can last far longer than that perishable gallon you're hoarding in your fridge. Leave the fresh dairy for your day-to-day shopping trips. For crisis preparation, it's a disaster in waiting. 4. Massive containers of discount spices. You don't need a Costco-sized tub of garlic powder to survive a crisis. Seriously, these massive containers of discount spices from Walmart are overkill and, quite frankly, a terrible addition to any survival stash. They might seem like a great deal at first glance, but there are several reasons why these bulk spices are basically useless. For starters, spices lose their potency over time. Those gigantic containers you think you'll use forever, they're going to sit in your pantry, degrading in flavor every time you open them. Humidity, air exposure, and improper storage make matters worse. Spice clumps? Gross. And once moisture gets in, those spices are done. They can cake up and become one solid, useless block of seasoning. Another issue with cheap bulk spices is the filler. Many of these massive containers are packed with low-grade spices or blends watered down with additives like salt and other fillers. Want bland, tasteless food during an emergency? Stockpile these, and that's exactly what you'll get. There's also the practical side to consider. Do you really need a gallon of paprika or garlic powder? Probably not. You're wasting space and money hoarding giant spice containers you'll never finish before they go bad. Small, high-quality spice jars or vacuum-sealed packets are a far better investment for prepping. Not only are they more potent, but they're also easier to store and rotate through. And don't forget the morale factor. Flavoring your meals during a crisis is crucial for keeping your spirits up, but that doesn't mean stocking up on low-quality junk. Invest wisely in smaller, pure spices that won't betray you when you need them most. Massive discount containers belong in the back of the store, not in your emergency stash. 5. White bread. If you're stockpiling white bread for an emergency, you're making a massive mistake. Sure, it's cheap, soft, and super versatile. It screams comfort food with every fluffy slice. But here's the reality check. It's a terrible option for long-term storage. This stuff barely lasts a week before it goes stale, moldy, or starts smelling off. Even if you try freezing it, the quality nosedives. Thawed white bread often ends up dry, crumbly, or tastes like the freezer itself. And nutritionally, forget about it. White bread is practically all refined flour, which means it gives you a quick energy boost but leaves you hungry faster. That's the last thing you need in an emergency. When you're rationing food, every calorie has to count. White bread fails miserably here because it offers almost zero fiber, protein, or meaningful nutrients. You'll eat it, sure, but you'll feel like you consumed air. Another big problem? White bread cannot handle unstable storage conditions. If you're relying on a freezer to keep loaves fresh, what happens when the power goes out for more than a few hours? You'll be stuck with soggy bread that attracts pests or molds in record time. There's a reason you see people panic buying bread during storms, only to realize days later they can't eat it all before it expires. If you're set on stockpiling carbs, go for whole grain bread that's vacuum sealed, or pick up tortillas instead. Tortillas last longer and don't need refrigeration right away. Freeze-dried or dehydrated bread products are also far superior because they retain texture and nutritional value for years, not days. Stocking up on white bread might seem like a quick and easy option, but it's a waste of money, space, and effort when prepping for the long haul. Let it stay on the Walmart shelf where it belongs. 6. Prepackaged fresh salads. If you think prepackaged salads belong in your emergency stash, you're setting yourself up for failure. At first glance, they seem like great additions, convenient, healthy, and ready to eat. But Don't be fooled. These bags are utter garbage for stockpiling, and here's why. First off, those bags of mixed greens have shockingly short shelf lives. Sometimes they're already starting to wilt or brown before you even get them home. Tear them open and the clock starts ticking even faster. Without constant refrigeration, they're doomed. These salad mixes practically disintegrate into a soggy mess within a couple of days if there's no cool environment. And the moisture content inside these bags? It's a ticking time bomb. High moisture speeds up decay and can even make contamination risks worse. Ever hear about those recalls for listeria or E. coli outbreaks in salad bags? That's not something you want to gamble on during an emergency, when medical help might be harder to come by. If your fridge loses power, that healthy stash of greens is just going to end up in the trash, taking your money with it. Besides, these salads don't do much for hunger or nutrition in a crisis. Sure, they have vitamins and minerals, but they're mostly water-heavy. You won't actually feel full after eating them, and when every calorie matters, that's not good enough. It's embarrassing to think people waste precious storage space on something this inefficient. Canned, freeze-dried, or powdered vegetables are where it's at. They retain nutrients longer and work in soups, stews, or emergency meals without needing refrigeration. If you're desperate for fresh greens, grow your own. At least then you'll have a sustainable source and won't be stuck with rotting bags of overpriced salad, turning into compost before you can even eat them. Prepackaged salads? Total stockpiling fail. 7 is cheap frozen TV dinners. Stocking your freezer with piles of bargain frozen dinners as part of your emergency stash is one of the worst plans you can make. Yes, they're convenient and super easy to prepare. You just microwave and eat. But here's the problem. They're packed with preservatives, sky-high sodium, and minimal actual nutrition. That might work fine for a lazy weeknight dinner, but in a real crisis, these meals are practically useless. The biggest flaw? They're entirely dependent on a working freezer. If the power goes out for even a few hours, those neatly stacked cardboard trays turn into soggy, leaky disasters. The second they thaw, they're unsafe to eat, and you'll be left chucking them out while you scramble for actual food. Space is another major issue. These meals take up a ton of room in your freezer, space that could be better used for versatile ingredients like frozen vegetables, proteins, or pre-cooked meals you batch make yourself. When push comes to shove, flexibility is key in an emergency, and frozen TV dinners don't give you that. Each tray is portioned out and pre-flavored, offering no way to stretch or modify the meal if you're feeding multiple people. Even worse, they lack substance. With high levels of carbs, preservatives, and salt, these dinners fill you up temporarily, but the crash is real. There's almost no fiber or lasting protein to keep you satiated. You're consuming empty calories that just don't help in a survival scenario. Websites about long-term food prepping repeatedly emphasize the importance of stocking ingredients that offer both flexibility and nutrition, like beans, rice, canned goods, and dried proteins. Frozen dinners don't fit the bill. And just think about the mess if your freezer fails. You'd have to deal with thawed food dripping everywhere, potentially contaminating your freezer and ruining other items. It's not worth the gamble. The convenience might sound appealing in the short term, but in real emergencies, cheap frozen dinners are a terrible choice for stockpiling. Leave them behind and focus on food options that can actually handle the pressure. The problem with stockpiling the wrong foods. When it comes to preparing for emergencies, it's easy to fall into the trap of stockpiling the wrong foods. I've learned firsthand that not all food is created equal, and poor choices can lead to wasted money, spoiled goods, and unnecessary stress when you need those resources the most. For instance, relying too heavily on freezer items might seem smart at first, but what happens if there's a power outage? I've lost whole stashes of frozen meals and meats during extended blackouts, leaving me with nothing but frustration. Another common issue is poor quality bulk purchases. I've made the mistake of buying cheap bulk food items from Walmart before, only to find out later that they don't store well. I can't even count how many times I found mold creeping into flour or dried goods I thought would last. Some of the items even became a feast for pantry pests like moths and weevils because they weren't packaged securely. It became clear to me that buying low-quality products, even in large quantities, doesn't save money. It creates more waste. Stockpiling ineffective foods puts me in a worse position when crisis hits, and I've made it a rule to focus on quality over quantity. Durable, long-lasting foods with secure packaging are key to avoiding spoilage and infestations. Preparing smarter, not harder, has been my biggest takeaway from these experiences. Avoiding these pitfalls has made a world of difference in my preparedness efforts. Characteristics of foods to avoid stockpiling. When it comes to building an emergency stockpile, not all foods are created equal. From my experience, avoiding certain types of foods can save you from wasting money or dealing with spoiled supplies in a crisis. First and foremost, I steer clear of foods with a short shelf life. Perishable items like fresh produce, dairy, or anything requiring refrigeration just won't last long in an emergency. While they're great for day-to-day meals, they're not reliable for long-term storage. Another characteristic I consider is nutritional value. Some foods might seem like convenient options, but I avoid items that lack sustenance or essential nutrients. Empty calorie snacks or foods overly loaded with sugar and refined carbs are tempting at first, but they won't provide energy or nutrients when you truly need them. Storage requirements are also a big factor. I've found that foods prone to pest infestation or those sensitive to humidity can quickly become unusable. Grains in poorly sealed packaging or snacks with a high oil content, for example, can attract insects or go rancid in damp conditions. I prefer items that are durable and easy to store under varying conditions. By avoiding these types of foods, I ensure my stockpile stays reliable, safe, and packed with essentials. Trust me, the last thing you want during an emergency is to find your supplies rotting, infested, or completely useless. Examples of foods to avoid. When it comes to stockpiling for emergencies, being selective is key. There are certain food items that may seem like good choices at first glance, but turn out to be impractical or even wasteful in the long run. Here are some examples of foods I specifically recommend avoiding, with insight into why they don't make the cut. One item that stands out is fresh dairy in bulk. While it may be tempting to buy large quantities of milk or other perishable dairy products, these spoil quickly without refrigeration. Unless you have a reliable way to keep them cold in the event of power outages, they're more trouble than they're worth. Instead, I opt for shelf-stable alternatives like powdered milk or evaporated milk. They keep for years and are far more practical in emergency scenarios. Another category to avoid is massive spice containers. While it's true that spices can make bland meals more palatable, buying spices in oversized containers often leads to waste. Over time, spices lose their potency, and in humid conditions they can clump or spoil. I've learned to focus on smaller, high-quality spice options that last longer and deliver better flavor in smaller quantities. Additionally, cheap frozen dinners may seem like a convenient addition to a stockpile, but they're not reliable. These meals depend entirely on continuous freezing, which can't be guaranteed during emergencies if power is lost. Instead, I lean toward shelf-stable, pre-packaged meals or freeze-dried options that are built to last. Lastly, I caution against purchasing large bags of cereals for your stash. These are often sold in non-airtight packaging, which allows them to go stale quickly. Personally, I've found that transferring smaller portions of cereals into Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers is the way to go if I want them to last for an extended period. Stockpiling is all about making smart decisions with practicality and longevity in mind. Avoiding these food items has saved me time, money, and frustration in the long run. Better alternatives for stockpiling. When it comes to stockpiling, it's crucial to make informed choices to ensure you're storing essentials that are both nutritious and long-lasting. Avoiding the wrong foods and opting for better alternatives can make a huge difference in emergencies or long-term situations. Below, I'll share better stockpiling alternatives for common food categories that are often listed as problematic. Take, for example, canned vegetables and fruits. These are a far better alternative to perishables like fresh produce, which spoil quickly when not refrigerated. Canned goods retain essential vitamins, minerals, and fiber, ensuring you get proper nutrition even if fresh versions aren't available. They are also incredibly convenient and typically have a long shelf life, often lasting years. Next, we have powdered or shelf-stable dairy products. These are a much smarter choice compared to fresh milk or cream, which spoils within days without refrigeration. Powdered milk, for instance, lasts for years and can be reconstituted when needed. This means you can still enjoy recipes and drinks that require milk without the worry of it going bad. For proteins, opting for canned meats, beans, and fish is a much better choice over highly processed or frozen perishable protein sources. These provide the necessary nutrition and energy while being shelf-stable. Plus, canned proteins often come in portion-friendly sizes, so nothing goes to waste. Another noteworthy category is comfort foods with a long shelf life, like chocolate bars, nuts, dried fruits, and jerky. Unlike fresh baked goods or pastry items, which spoil quickly, these alternatives store well and provide a morale boost during stressful times. Comfort food may not be essential for survival, but it undeniably plays a role in keeping spirits high. Finally, freeze-dried foods are perhaps one of the best alternatives for stockpiling. With minimal weight and maximum nutritional retention, they outperform frozen or overly processed options in both durability and practicality. Used by backpackers and seasoned preppers alike, they're reliable and easy to store long-term. By focusing on these better alternatives, you can achieve a balanced stockpile that prepares you for any situation, while avoiding the pitfalls of quick-to-spoil or unreliable food sources. Key considerations for stockpiling. When planning to stockpile, one of the most important rules I follow is to avoid impulse buys. It's easy to be tempted by discounted items or products that seem like a good idea at the moment, but this often leads to waste. I've learned that sticking to a written plan or an inventory is essential in keeping stockpiling efforts smart and efficient. Impulse buys are usually driven by emotion, and more often than not, they include perishable items or foods with minimal shelf life. For example, I've noticed people stock up on fancy snacks or luxury canned goods during sales, only for those items to expire in storage. Not everything that seems useful ends up serving a real purpose in an emergency situation. By writing a detailed plan of what I actually need, I avoid overspending and wasting resources. Another reason to skip impulse purchases is that they might not align with proper nutritional needs. Filling storage shelves with random items delays progress in building a stockpile that truly sustains long-term health. For example, sugary treats or highly processed foods offer little value in survival situations compared to staple foods like grains, beans, or dehydrated vegetables. Ultimately, preparation is key. I take time to research and stick to my written list, focusing on durable, nutrient-rich items that work with my storage conditions. Avoiding impulse buys is about discipline. It saves money and ensures a reliable, functional stockpile for the future. Common mistakes by new preppers. When I first began prepping, I made countless mistakes, many of which are common among new preppers. One of the biggest errors I see is stockpiling large amounts of food without properly considering storage or shelf life. It's tempting to grab everything you normally eat and stash it away, but if the food spoils too quickly or requires conditions like refrigeration, your efforts might go to waste. Another misstep is over-relying on refrigeration or freezers. While they are great for short-term storage, power outages can render your entire frozen stock useless. Instead, I've learned to focus on shelf-stable items that don't require electricity to remain edible. Panic buying is also a trap many fall into, grabbing perishable goods like fresh produce when shortages hit. These foods go bad quickly and are often not practical for long-term food security. It's important to remain calm and select items that provide longevity and nutrition. Lastly, neglecting proper storage techniques or rotation is a recipe for disaster. I used to throw everything into my pantry without a system, only to realize later that earlier purchases had gone bad. Labeling items with expiration dates and practicing FIFO, first in, first out, has saved me from unnecessary waste. Avoiding these mistakes has been a game changer for me as a prepper. Adjusting how I stockpile food now ensures that I'm better prepared for emergencies without wasting time, money, or resources. Psychological aspect of stockpiling. When it comes to stockpiling, I believe it's not just about filling your pantry with essentials, but also considering how food impacts our morale during challenging times. Comfort foods play a significant role in maintaining a positive mental outlook. I know that during stressful situations, having something familiar and enjoyable to eat can provide a sense of normalcy and relief. However, not all comfort foods make the cut for an emergency stockpile. For instance, perishable items like ice cream or bakery goods might boost your mood, but they lack practicality for long-term storage. Instead, I prioritize comfort foods that have a decent shelf life and are practical. Canned soups, chocolate, or even jars of peanut butter can offer both emotional support and nutritional value. That said, I always avoid stocking up on empty-calorie snacks that take up space but offer little nourishment. Keeping a balance between nutrition and comfort is key. Mental resilience is just as crucial as physical readiness during emergencies, and I want to feel prepared for both. Smart stockpiling isn't just about survival, it's also about maintaining some small joys to keep spirits high when times are tough. Practical tips for effective stockpiling. When it comes to stockpiling, it's just as important to know what not to stockpile as it is to know what to include. During my own preparations, I've learned that certain foods from Walmart, while convenient and inexpensive, aren't always the best choices for long-term storage. Here's a quick guide to some items I steer clear of and why. First, I avoid foods with short shelf lives like fresh bread or dairy products. While they may be tempting, these items won't last long in storage and will likely go to waste. Instead, I've opted for alternatives like powdered milk or freeze-dried goods that can stay viable for years. Packaged snack foods such as chips or crackers are another category I steer clear of. These are high in sodium and unhealthy fats, and their packaging doesn't do well in long-term storage conditions. Even vacuum-sealed versions tend to lose their texture and flavor over time. I've found that focusing on grains or homemade granola is a more sustainable option. Canned goods can be lifesavers in emergencies, but not all canned products are equal. For example, canned fruits packed in syrup are heavy, have unnecessary added sugars, and take up valuable space. Whenever I include canned items in my stockpile, I make it a point to select those with natural juices or water-based options. Finally, I steer clear of foods with artificial preservatives or chemical additives. These might seem like a good fit for long storage, but I prefer to prioritize nutrient-dense foods without harmful chemicals. My stockpile works best when it's filled with unprocessed, wholesome options. By being selective and strategic, I ensure my supplies are practical, healthy, and long-lasting.